When most people think of South Carolina, they imagine beaches, golf courses, and southern charm. But scattered across this state are places that seem completely impossible. Some were built with grand ambitions that collapsed into ruin. Others were erased deliberately, and the reasons will disturb you. These are 10 South Carolina places that make absolutely no sense until you discover what really happened. Now, let us begin. Number 10. We start in the tiny town of Ridgway in Fairfield County, population around 300. It sits along a quiet stretch of road about 30 miles north of Columbia, and right there on Palmer Street stands what locals proudly call the world's smallest police station. It is barely larger than a telephone box. The structure measures roughly 5 feet by 5 feet. You could fit maybe 2 people inside if they stood very close together. When visitors first see it, they assume it must be a joke. How could anyone enforce the law from a space the size of a bathroom? But the answer goes back more than a century. This structure was originally the town well. In the days when cotton was king, farmers would bring their mules and oxen into Ridgway to haul their harvest to market. Before leaving town, they would stop at this well to water their animals. It was a gathering point, a landmark, a vital piece of infrastructure for a community built on agriculture. Then, in 1940, as part of the Works Progress Administration, the well was covered up and transformed. The town converted it into what they called the world's smallest police station. The name stuck. The building stayed. Today, Ridgway remains a quiet place. The police chief will tell you that traffic violations are their biggest headache. Crime is extraordinarily rare. The most notable incident in recent memory was a gas station drive-off about 2 months back. But that tiny station has had its share of fame. It appeared in the 1989 film Staying Together starring Stockard Channing. And on June 25, 1996, the Centennial Olympic Torch Relay made an official rest stop right in front of that miniature building. Ridgway is also home to the largest barbecue cook-off in South Carolina. So the town with the smallest police station throws the biggest barbecue. There is a certain poetry in that. A police station built over a well is certainly unusual. But what about an entire theme park that was meant to be a Christian Disneyland, but now sits in ruins? Number 9. About 15 miles south of Charlotte, just across the state line in Fort Mill, sits one of the strangest abandoned places in America. A crumbling 21-story hotel tower looms over suburban townhouses. Miniature railroad tracks lead nowhere. The ruins of what looks like a small city are slowly being reclaimed by nature. This was Heritage USA. It was built by televangelist Jim Bakker and his wife Tammy Faye Bakker in the late 1970s. The park opened in 1978, and it grew at an astonishing pace. By 1986, Heritage USA was attracting nearly 6 million visitors annually. It employed around 2,500 people. At its peak, it was the third most visited theme park in the entire United States. Only Walt Disney World and Disneyland had more guests. The complex sprawled across 2,300 acres. There was a water park, a shopping mall, a television studio where the PTL Club broadcast to millions. There were hotels and condominiums and a miniature steam train that carried families through manicured gardens. The whole enterprise earned $126 million per year at its height. Then came the scandal. The IRS revoked the tax exemption. Federal investigators began asking questions. 165,000 people had each donated $1,000 in exchange for a promised lifetime of annual 4-day vacation stays at the Heritage USA Hotel. When the scheme unraveled, each donor received just $6.54 in compensation. Starting in 1987, Jim Bakker's legal and personal troubles made national headlines. In September 1989, Hurricane Hugo swept through and caused severe damage to many of the buildings. Heritage USA closed shortly after the storm. The dream of a Christian Disneyland collapsed under the weight of scandal and wind. Today, the ruins still stand. Some buildings have been repurposed, others simply decay. The 21-story tower remains unfinished, a monument to ambition that flew too close to the sun. A theme park that collapsed under scandal is dramatic enough. But what about an entire town deliberately erased from the map because the government needed to build something far more dangerous? Number 8. Ellenton was once a bustling little town between Aiken and Barnwell counties. Families had lived there for generations. Children walked to school along dirt roads. Farmers worked the land their grandfathers had cleared. Then, in 1950, everything changed. The United States Atomic Energy Commission arrived with an announcement that would erase Ellenton from existence. The government needed this land. They were going to build a nuclear plant to harvest plutonium and other radioactive material for the hydrogen bomb. The residents had no choice. The government forced everyone out of their homes in town. They left behind everything they had ever known: houses, churches, cemeteries. The fabric of an entire community was ripped apart overnight. What rose in place of Ellenton was the Savannah River site, one of the most significant nuclear facilities of the Cold War era, and one of the most radioactive places on Earth. The old town of Ellenton is not accessible to the public today. Signs warn people away. The area remains contaminated. For the former residents, being kicked off their family's land and forced to move against their will was devastating enough. Knowing that the land where they raised their children is now too dangerous to visit adds another layer of grief. A new town called New Ellenton was established nearby for the displaced families, but it was never the same. You cannot rebuild generations of memory in a few years. The old Ellenton exists now only in photographs and fading recollections. A ghost town created not by economic decline or natural disaster, but by the demands of nuclear warfare. A town erased for nuclear weapons is haunting. But what about a thriving valley that was deliberately drowned, where you can still dive down to visit the cemetery? Number 7. Lake Jocassee sits in the Blue Ridge foothills of northwestern South Carolina. The water is so clear you can see 60 feet down. Mountain ridges rise green and ancient on every side. It looks like something from a postcard. But beneath those pristine waters lies an entire world that was lost. The area that is now Lake Jocassee was once called Jocassee Valley. In the 1920s, it was a popular resort destination. The Otakula Lodge welcomed guests who came to escape the summer heat of the lowlands. Families had lived in these mountains for generations. There were farms and churches and a small community called Mount Carmel with its own cemetery where the dead had been buried for over a century. Then Duke Power began quietly buying up land. Operating through a subsidiary called South Carolina Land and Timber Company, they purchased more than 100,000 acres between the 1920s and 1960s. They did not tell the local residents what they were planning. On January 2, 1965, Duke Power made the official announcement. They intended to flood the Jocassee and Keowee valleys to create 2 hydroelectric dams. The families who remained would have to sell and leave. By 1973, the dam was complete. The water began to rise. Farms vanished beneath the surface. Houses disappeared. Roads that had connected communities for generations were swallowed by the lake. The Otakula Lodge still stands today under 300 feet of water. Deep water scuba divers can descend to view its skeleton. And while Duke Power relocated the vast majority of the graves before flooding the valley, the stone foundations of the Mount Carmel Church and a few stray markers remain on the lake bottom. Divers can still navigate down to see these haunting structures through the murky darkness. The lake's name comes from the Cherokee language. Jocassee means place of the lost one. The Cherokee lost their land to settlers. Then the settlers lost the land to the waters. There is a cruel symmetry in that name now. Today, Lake Jocassee is a pristine recreation area. Kayakers and fishermen come from across the region. Most have no idea they are floating above an entire drowned world. A drowned valley with a submerged cemetery is profoundly strange. But what about a town that was designed to become the Charleston of the upstate and is now nothing but rubble in the forest? Number 6. Drive about 18 miles northeast of Union in South Carolina's upstate and you will find yourself on a remote stretch of road surrounded by dense forest. There is a locked gate, a few historical markers, and if you know where to look, you will see piles of stone and bricks scattered among the trees. This is what remains of Pinckneyville, or rather, what remains of the dream of Pinckneyville. In 1791, the state legislature created the Pinckney District, which combined what is now Union, Spartanburg, Chester, and York counties. The planners were ambitious. They wanted to build an upcountry version of Charleston, a city that would become the commercial and cultural heart of the interior. Streets were laid out, public buildings were constructed, officials moved in. For a few years, the vision seemed achievable. Then, just 9 years later, in 1800, the legislature abolished the Pinckney District. The administrative functions moved to Union. The population of Pinckneyville stagnated and then declined. Without the government offices, there was no reason for people to stay. By 1835, the legislature passed a law authorizing the sale of all public land and buildings in Pinckneyville. The town was officially finished. Some families lingered into the 20th century, but eventually even they left. Today, the nearest home is 2 miles away. What remains of the upstate's Little Charleston is just piles of rubble and stone foundations slowly being consumed by the forest. An old cemetery holds the graves of those who believed this place would matter. The railroad that might have saved Pinckneyville never came. It went to Union instead. And that was the end of the dream. A town that tried to be Charleston and failed is a quiet tragedy. But what about an island where there are no cars at all, and residents travel everywhere by golf cart? Number 5. Along South Carolina's southern coast, nestled between Hilton Head and Savannah, sits Daufuskie Island. The island measures about 5 miles long and 2.5 miles wide. It is a large barrier island by any standard. But here is what makes Daufuskie unlike anywhere else. There is no bridge connecting the island to the mainland, and typically no bridges means no cars. The 400 residents of Daufuskie Island live a different sort of life than the rest of us. They travel by golf cart along sandy paths. Mail, groceries, and people all arrive by boat. There are no traffic lights, no rush hour, no honking horns or exhaust fumes. The island's history is as unusual as its present. Things got intense in the early 1700s when Spanish forces and their Native American allies fought British settlers trying to establish colonies in the Port Royal area. The violent conflicts gave us Bloody Point, a name that still marks the southwestern shore where brutal battles took place during the Yamasee War from 1715 to 1717. After the Revolutionary War, Daufuskie became famous for producing some of the finest sea island cotton in the world. This was not ordinary cotton. European royalty prized it for its exceptional quality and long, silky fibers. Because the island was so isolated, the enslaved people who worked the cotton developed their own distinct culture called Gullah or Geechee. They preserved African traditions, language, crafts, and foodways that might otherwise have disappeared entirely. That culture persists on Daufuskie to this day. The author Pat Conroy made the island famous in his autobiographical novel, The Water is Wide. He taught the island's Gullah children in 1968 and wrote about the experience with heartbreaking honesty. Today, Daufuskie sits just across the Calabogue Sound from Hilton Head with its golf courses and luxury resorts. But it feels like a different century entirely. An island without cars is a deliberate choice to preserve the past. But what about a town where the entire economy once depended on a bomb that was accidentally dropped from the sky? Number 4. On a quiet spring day in 1958, the residents of Mars Bluff in Florence County were going about their ordinary lives. The Gregg family was at home. Children were playing in the yard. Then the United States Air Force accidentally dropped a 7,600-pound atomic bomb on their property. Let that sink in for a moment. An actual nuclear weapon fell from the sky onto a family home in rural South Carolina. The bomb was not armed with a nuclear warhead. That detail probably saved everyone within several miles, but it was still loaded with conventional explosives for detonation. When it hit the ground, it exploded. The blast destroyed the Gregg family's house. It obliterated their garden and various outbuildings. A crater 30 feet deep and 75 feet across was gouged into the earth. Giant clods of dirt rained down across the neighborhood. Miraculously, all 6 members of the Gregg family survived, injured but alive. The crater is still there today, heavily overgrown with trees and brush on private property. A roadside marker commemorates the infamous accident. Artifacts from the incident are on display at the Florence County Museum. The Air Force paid the Gregg family $54,000 in damages. The pilot who accidentally released the bomb was simply reassigned. No one was court-martialed. The Cold War demanded certain sacrifices, and apparently that included occasionally dropping nuclear weapons on American civilians. A town marked by an accidental nuclear bomb is bizarre enough. But what about a fishing village where the mayor has held office for nearly 50 years and the entire community is fighting to prevent their way of life from disappearing? Number 3. McClellanville is a tiny town of about 500 people located midway down South Carolina's Atlantic coast. It sits surrounded almost entirely by the Francis Marion National Forest. There are no stoplights. The pace of life is measured in tides and seasons rather than hours and minutes. This community has sustained itself economically for generations by the commercial harvest of approximately 47 different species from the sea. Shrimp boats crank up at 4 in the morning. Oystermen work the marshes. Fishing captains have passed their knowledge down through families for over a century. For decades, McClellanville's local leadership was defined by a man named Rutledge Leland III, who served as mayor for over 40 years and ran the town's largest seafood business, Carolina Seafood. The residents must appreciate what Leland and the fishing industry provide because they keep re-electing him. And they put up with some inconveniences. They listen to boats cranking up before dawn. They accept the big trucks that rumble through to pick up product. With very few exceptions, they remain supportive. As one local put it, "We want shrimp boats there." But McClellanville is fighting against powerful forces. The working waterfront is under pressure. The largest seafood business owner is approaching retirement, and the future along Jeremy Creek is uncertain. Young people leave for cities with more opportunity. Development pressures from nearby Charleston threaten to transform the character of the region. McClellanville stands apart from other working waterfronts in South Carolina in important ways. Its geographic isolation has helped maintain a rural attitude. Commercial fishing remains the economic driver. Unlike other coastal communities that have transformed into tourist destinations, McClellanville still feels like a fishing village. How long that can last, no one knows for certain. A fishing village fighting to survive is a story of community and resilience. But what about a town that was built by wealthy northerners to play polo and train racehorses and still has unpaved roads so the horses can exercise safely? Number 2. Aiken sits in the western part of South Carolina near the Georgia border. Population around 30,000. It looks at first glance like many other pleasant southern towns. Tree-lined streets, gracious old homes, churches with tall white steeples. Then you notice something strange. Some of the roads through the center of town are not paved. They are soft, sandy paths. And then you see the horses. Horses walking calmly down those sandy roads. Horses with the right-of-way over automobiles. There is even a traffic button that allows riders to stop cars so their horses can cross safely. The explanation goes back to the 1890s. The town's beauty and warm winter climate drew wealthy families from the Northeast and Midwest. They came for the season and they brought their horses with them. The Whitneys, the Vanderbilts, the Astors. Families whose names still echo through American history established what became known as the Winter Colony. They built grand estates, They created polo fields. They established racetracks. Over the decades, Aiken became one of the most important equestrian centers in the entire country. Facilities exist for trail riding and fox hunting, hunter-jumper events, steeplechasing, and thoroughbred training. Nearly every major horse race in America has at least one competitor that trained in Aiken. At the heart of it all sits Hitchcock Woods, the largest urban forest in the country at 2,200 acres. More than 65 miles of pine-scented sandy trails wind through the property. And those trails are limited to foot and hoof traffic only. No cars, no bicycles, just people and horses moving through the trees. The Aiken Polo Club joined the United States Polo Association in 1889. Polo is still played today at Whitney Field. By the time of the Second World War, Aiken was the acknowledged center of America's polo world during the winter months. 7 of the 21 American-born players who have achieved a 10-goal rating called Aiken home. The unpaved roads are not an oversight. They are maintained deliberately so horses can exercise safely on soft footing. The entire town was designed around equestrian life, and it has never wavered from that purpose. A town where horses come first is a testament to tradition persisting against modernity. But our final destination is perhaps the strangest of all, a tunnel that goes nowhere, built for a railway that never arrived, and where a university once aged cheese in the darkness. Number 1. In the Blue Ridge Mountains of Oconee County, a tunnel bores deep into Stumphouse Mountain. Step inside and the temperature drops immediately to around 50 degrees regardless of the season outside. The air is damp. The darkness is absolute once you move beyond the reach of daylight. Walk forward and after about 1,600 feet, you reach a wall of solid granite. The tunnel simply ends. No exit, no railway tracks, just rock and silence and cold. This is Stumphouse Tunnel, and its story is one of ambition thwarted by history. In the 1850s, South Carolina dreamed of connecting the port of Charleston to the Mississippi River by railroad. The economic potential was enormous, but there was a problem. The Appalachian Mountains stood in the way. The solution was to bore through. Stumphouse Tunnel was designed to be the longest railroad tunnel in the United States. Workers began carving through the solid blue granite of the Blue Ridge. It was brutal, dangerous work. Progress was measured in feet per week. Then came the Civil War. Construction stopped. The workers left. The money dried up. The tunnel was never completed. What remains is 1,600 feet of passage reaching deep into the mountain. A monument to a transportation network that would have transformed the entire region. If the railroad had come through this tunnel, the economic geography of the South might have developed entirely differently. Instead, the project was abandoned and forgotten. For decades, the tunnel sat empty. Then Clemson University discovered that the constant temperature and humidity created perfect conditions for aging blue cheese. For years, the university made and aged cheese in the darkness of Stumphouse Tunnel. The project eventually ended, but the tunnel remained. Today, visitors come from across the region to walk into the darkness, to feel the temperature drop, to stand at the wall of granite where the workers stopped over 160 years ago. Near the tunnel entrance sits Issaquena Falls, plunging around 100 feet through the lush forest. The tunnel is perhaps the perfect symbol of South Carolina itself, a place where ambitious dreams and unexpected history collide, where the things that make no sense at first always have a story underneath, where a railway was supposed to unite a nation but instead became a place to age cheese, and where the past is never quite as far away as you might think.